Gordon, Chad Knaus, and more. Let's go. For more than a century, auto racing has captured the imagination of millions. It's the people, the cars, the tracks. They're all mile markers on an unforgettable journey. This is Glory Road.
Welcome to Glory Road. I'm Ray Evernham. NASCAR racing has come a long way in its 70-year history. Some things are the same. The competitive spirit on the track and in the garage area is just as strong. But the changes to the race car itself are massive. The sport began with cars that were hardly any different than what you'd buy at the dealership, and has transformed to feature highly engineered speed machines. Tonight, we'll talk with some Hall of Fame drivers and mechanics about the evolution of the stock car. Let's go.
Today's automobiles have what it takes to go where you want and how you want. Big V8 engines, power and performance to spare, solid frames, balanced chassis for good handling. They want to see what our car will do in competition. So, a sport was born. Stock car racing. Today, the largest spectator sport in America. Motor fans love it.
After World War II, Bill France saw the idea of racing stock cars to be a reality. On June 19th, 1949, Bill held the first strictly stock car race at the Charlotte Speedway. The cars were off the showroom or off the driveway, and it was proof that stock cars could put on a good show.
When NASCAR was being built and established, you needed cars. Car count was important, racetracks were important. You had to have race cars and racetracks to do what we do, and you basically run what you run to the racetrack.
The 1950 Darlington was added to the schedule, a 500-mile race on pavement. That brought the need for some change to cars. People were looking for different ways to use manufacturers' parts and pieces in a way that would give them an edge. But the cars were still literally stock.
We got the whole complete car, and we tore it apart, took everything out of it, and everything, stripped it down to bare essentials, and it was relatively easy. You know, I mean, we didn't do a whole lot of chopping on the frame at that time.
But it was all stock dealership parts?
Yes, everything, you know, the spindle and the steering stuff and everything, you could buy at Ford, but everything on the thing, all of it was stock.
Drivers had to wear seat belts. They had to have a roll cage. They might have strapped the door shut with a belt. That's how stock the cars were.
My mind just goes crazy with curiosity over what that must have been like to be in one of those cars in a race. Those guys were tough. You know, the drivers that ran those cars, it's funny because they didn't know any better. They didn't know how to make things different. It just all happens over years and years of evolution.
A great change came in 1959 with the opening of the Daytona Speedway. That was a track that was unlike anything that stock cars had ever run on before. And Bill France wanted worldwide recognition for the Speedway, but also he didn't want the cars to go out there and fall apart. So Bill France allowed, kind of off the radar, some changes to beef up these cars.
You could reinforce the suspension, A-frames, and steering system, you know, but that was it.
The cars were basically stock until the 1960s. That's when custom frames and chassis came into the picture, which were needed to adapt the cars to superspeedways and a new focus on 500-mile races.
Holman Moody came up with a rolling chassis that they started to make available. They saw the need to develop a chassis and subframe that would work. The cars kept the stock body panels, but underneath it, it was becoming a real race car.
In recent years, as the speeds have increased so dramatically on the racetracks around the country, there's been a growing concern over aerodynamics in automobiles. Let's take a quick look here at a couple of diagrams to give you an idea of how the principle of aerodynamics is being used in applying
spoilers or wings to these automobiles.
By the late 60s, Chrysler and Ford pushed NASCAR into an aerodynamic arms race. The cars grew wings and outlandish noses and strayed far from the style of car the average American was driving at home. NASCAR had to rein all that in, but the teams and the manufacturers were still looking for any advantage.
Teams were finding certain makes of cars ran better on certain tracks. A team that was a GM team might run a Chevrolet Monte Carlo at the short tracks, but then when they would go to Daytona and Talladega, they needed a sleeker car, so they might run an Olds Cutlass on those super speedway races. It wasn't unusual for a guy to drive 2 or 3 different makes or models of cars during a season.
But as the 70s came to a close, the cars would soon be making a dramatic leap into a new generation. You're watching Glory Road, brought to you by Hendrick Automotive Group. You're watching Glory Road, brought to you by VP Racing Fuels.
3 years ago, the major car manufacturers downsized their intermediate offerings, and NASCAR will follow suit for the coming year. The new cars are several inches shorter and slightly narrower. They'll get their competition debut here at Daytona International Speedway.
In 1981, NASCAR had one of its most seismic rule changes. NASCAR makes the decision that we're gonna shorten the wheelbase of our race cars. They went from 115-inch wheelbase down to 110, and there were some problems.
This hatchback window, the air's coming off the roof, and it's creating a vacuum here, and it's not touching the deck lid. And, you know, we've been arguing to get a higher spoiler rule so we could get a spoiler where we can plant the car onto the ground and where the drivers can feel comfortable.
Drivers were spooked. They were scared that, you know, there's something aerodynamically about these cars that isn't stable.
Johnny Anderson out of control in one of the qualifiers on Thursday. And then just moments later, Johnny Saylor out of the same turn 2, literally flying.
These cars are still dangerous and can be very unpredictable.
They're just very unstable. I don't think I've ever driven anything that scares me any worse than these new 81 model cars do. They're flighty, and you're not really sure where they're going to take off from or land.
In 81, we went to the small car, and we went to the little 81 Buick Regal. I said, we'll never, ever get this thing to where I can drive it. The first time I went out, we had open face helmet and bubble goggles, and I went down the back straightaway, and it turned my helmet around. So much air was coming in around the A-post, and it was loose. I mean, good grief. You had a square back window. The spoiler wasn't seeing any air. And you had all this nice rounded front nose, and you get the front down, but you couldn't get the back to go with it. We had our hands full of those cars.
When they downsized the cars, that really changed a lot, because then everything was purpose-built. I mean, because the cars got way small. That's what started the whole next generation as far as NASCAR is concerned.
Over the next couple of years, the cars kept evolving, and aerodynamics once again became the key.
Thunderbird came out with a rounder, more aerodynamic car. When that round car came out, you really started to get to the front.
83 is when Ford came out with the round Thunderbird. It was definitely more aerodynamic than the 82. In 84, I won 3 races with it. Then we were really starting to figure out the rounder T-Bird and what it liked. We'd go to some of the places with real long straightaways, and we'd take some of the downforce out of the car. Maybe in that time it wasn't the exact thing to do, but you didn't have the power to pull the car down the straightaway. You had to find that balance, and that's what we're always looking for.
A second Aero Wars took flight, with the Ford Thunderbird leading the way.
The Thunderbirds went on to win 14 of 28 races last year, thanks to their aerodynamic efficiency. General Motors wasn't asleep.
Chevrolet's like, how are we going to respond to this? We're going to make the Monte Carlo Aero Coupe. We're going to add a rear glass to it. Pontiac says, we're going to make the Pontiac Grand Prix 2+2. They added these fishbowl glasses on the back of the cars.
Maybe a Pontiac had more advantage at a racetrack than a Buick or a Thunderbird, but in that era, the Bi-Sply tires was the equalizer through the whole deal.
As the cars evolved, so did the only part that actually touches the racetrack, tires. NASCAR made a major change in 1989 from Bi-Sply to radial tires.
Now, the Bi-Sply tire has been around in Winston Cup racing forever. The radial tire is fairly new. The difference isn't really visible from the outside. It's the way the tires are constructed, the inside fabric that's different. But the engineers have really developed a better and better tire, and it looks like they're here to stay.
When you had bias tires, like a bowl of jelly, you could roll the car around. When we first started running the radial tire, I mean, that thing would scare the hell out of you. That thing was like, grip, 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 I'm out of here. It took some time for all of us to go from what we was comfortable with to a car that, if you made a mistake, you're going to spit out.
It wasn't the first advancement in tire construction. The evolution of the tire mirrored how the cars changed through each generation.
The cars way back in the 50s were stock cars, and so were the tires. We basically had passenger tires on those cars to go out and race. In the early 60s, we ran the fastest passenger tire that we had. We ran police car tires, and then in the mid-60s, actually developed a purpose-built stock car tire. In about 1967, 1968, we developed a tire within a tire.
Here's a new tire just designed for this race. There, an inner liner is being put in case the outer liner blows.
If you have a puncture and the tire goes flat, the car doesn't go down on the steel rim and allows the driver to get back in the pits and change the tires. The next milestone for us was 1972. We introduced a tire that was completely smooth. People are a little bit concerned because, wow, there's no tread at all on this. I'm not sure, this makes sense. You talk about introducing a radial in the mid-'80s. Well, this is still a radial, but the things that have changed in this are just unbelievable, and you can't see it. That's the issue, isn't it? You can't see it, right?
Goodyear continues to innovate, and it's likely we'll see some major changes in the coming years to keep the tire in step with the rest of the car's evolution. Glory Road is brought to you by JRI Shocks. You're watching Glory Road, brought to you by AutoGeek.
In '92, NASCAR gave the teams the ability to work with some fiberglass. And all of a sudden, all of the fenders weren't coming from the manufacturer, they were being fabricated. And they allowed the teams to work inside of a gray area. And some of the cars were twisted. I mean, that car of that era was called the Twisted Sister. It was shaped to the wind, and NASCAR found that as time went on, the cars were less and less stock appearing.
Safety has always been a key factor in advancing the race car, but unfortunately, many of those changes are often a reaction to tragedy. Dale Earnhardt's passing in 2001 forced everyone to rethink everything.
You look at 99 and 2000, we got those little knocks on the door with Tony Roper and the truck race at Texas and Adam Petty at Loudon, Kenny Irwin at Loudon. We kept getting those little knocks, and then of course the final lap, turn 4 of the 2001 Daytona 500, not only did we get a knock, the door got kicked slam off the hinges.
Unfortunately, well, we lost Dale Sr. for things to really get on a high speed, hey, let's figure this out fix.
After the sport's darkest day, NASCAR needed to evolve its cars in a major way to keep its stars safe.
When they go to design a new car, is safety the first thing that they look at?
Absolutely. Every part of a race car or a decision is based off of how's it going to affect safety.
Well, eventually you start saying, well, you can only evolve the car we have so far. So now we've developed a car that's taken all of these safety ideas that won't translate to the car of today, and we've called it Car of Tomorrow.
Despite all the changes to increase safety, the car of tomorrow took a lot of heat for its boxy look and unusual rear wing.
I don't know what to think. If we get out of here with the fenders on it and a smile on our face, I'll probably love it. Otherwise, I'll hate it.
The first car tomorrow race, and Kyle Busch ushers in this era.
I'm still not a very big fan of these things. I can't stand to drive them. They suck.
A lot of people look back and they say, well, the car tomorrow was, nobody liked it, it was a failure, it wasn't, and I look at it and think, that was a line in the sand, I think, that changed safety for the positive. Do you feel that way?
Absolutely. We were looking at it underneath the skin of the car. The car tomorrow gets badged because of the skin of the car. What was underneath that skin, nobody argued about. You know, it was what it was. And oh, by the way, though, it was that big step, and it's improved every day since then. But that was that big step from Gen 5 to Gen 6 underneath the skin that helped us in that cause of being safer on the racetrack.
Everything has to evolve. Our point system has evolved. Our cars are evolving, and you know the first thing about it is the car is safer. So whatever it is after that is a bonus, and you know the drivers have more room inside, and you know there's a lot of things built into the car to absorb energy when they hit the wall. And the bottom line is NASCAR has to make the best decision for them, and you know they felt that it was time to evolve the car and make it safer, and the teams will figure out the rest.
You know, the car itself was successful in that there was no driver terribly injured in that car, but NASCAR knew that the appearance of the car and the criticism of the drivers was going to really hurt the popularity of the sport, and so that led to the 6th generation car.
You're watching Glory Road, brought to you by Goodyear. Glory Road is brought to you by Valvoline.
The excitement continues to be. As anxious as a 6-year-old on Christmas morning.
They took all of the best safety components of the COT, but then they put it into this car that was much more attractive to look at.
For the second time, the Daytona 500 goes to Jimmy Johnson.
An awful lot of effort went into, from everybody's part, to be quite honest with you, from NASCAR to all the teams to get prepared for the Daytona 500 this year with the Gen 6 car.
So from the early 90s to where we are today, the cars have changed a good bit. What drives that development?
I think we're getting back into where a lot of the development is headed off by the OEMs and what it is that they're trying to get more relevancy into the sport. So I think you can tell by the way that the cars look now with the Camaro and the Mustang and what those guys are doing. They look a lot like what we've got on the racetrack, and I think the OEMs are definitely using that as a part of a development process.
It's a function of keeping the automobile industry interested in being a part of the sport, and then the sport being respectful to that.
As the stock car evolves, so does the way NASCAR enforces the rulebook.
All the cars entered in the race have to be impounded and inspected by NASCAR officials to make sure they're mechanically within the strict specifications for stock car entries.
The factories got so involved, the competition between them was so great. It put NASCAR in a position they had to do something to control that. And so they tried to do that with their templates and with their inspection areas and all that kind of stuff. Of course, you know yourself, a race car person isn't going to let that deter what he's going to do. To me, that's what was the difference in racing back in our day and now.
That's where our inspection and our rulemaking process has matured. As a crew chief, you want to go through the inspection process knowing that when you get ready to race, your car can be competitive with any other make that's out there.
We were kidding about officials, right? The inspection process has definitely changed. How's that changed the way you build the cars?
Yeah, it's different. You know, you sleight of hand used to come into play. Now it's all automated. You know, we've got the Hawkeye scanner, which measures your body.
When you build a car, do you have to have that Hawkeye scanner on site?
Yeah. So there's different ways to measure the surface of the body. We have a scanner on this coordinate measuring system that we use that picks up millions of data points. Okay, we were building our cars to the spec of our equipment, which was at a higher level than what NASCAR was using at that point in time, and we weren't getting away with as much as what some of the other teams were. And we were
right to the tolerance,
right,
accurate.
Then we didn't need to do that. So we had to go and get their machine, and we put it in our shop, we set it up, and we started using it. We're like, oh my gosh, no wonder we've been in a slump for about 6 months, right? And that really put us behind for about a year. And finally now we're starting to recover from that and seeing the performance on the racetrack.
With the evolution of the Gen 6 car and the inspection process, the performance gap between cars continues to narrow. As we look towards the Gen 7 car, what can we expect?
What does Dustin think they need to do for a Gen 7 car to create what the fans want to see?
I'm not an aerodynamicist, but there's got to be a way for drivers to reasonably be able to show their talents and be able to do the things that make people sit in the stands and go, wow, I can't do that.
I think in order to get racing like I would think it would need to be, they got to put more of it back in the driver and the crew chief's hands.
I'd like to see a car lighter. I'd like to see a car that aerodynamically puts on a good. I mean, that's the thing is now I've got to take enough of myself away from the driver's seat to go, okay, this is how I want the car to drive. But at the same time, I want to be 3 and 4 wide and put on a heck of a show.
I think we're going to see a materials change, you know, in the structure of the car.
Materials in the frame?
Yeah, you know, tubular chassis. That's not what we drive on the street anymore. It's, you know, composite materials. I think that's where we're going to go.
Can you give us a little peek behind the curtain of what we can expect from the Gen 7 car?
Appearance-wise, it'll be a step further than what we've got today. And I think what we've got today with the collaboration with the manufacturers is the look of the Mustang, the look of the Camaro, the look of the Camry. But imagine that getting better. Underneath that skin is where so much of the advancement will take place. Making room for things that we can change and make it easier to change instead of having to build a whole new car. We've learned a lot of that in 72 years, and that'll be applied to this car.
The next step in stock car evolution, commonly known as the Gen 7 car, isn't slated to hit the racetrack until 2021 at the earliest. I'm excited to see where the sport's headed, but I still love looking back at all the ways the cars have changed over the decades. The combination of technology and competitive ingenuity is just cool. Thanks for taking a ride with us on Glory Road.